There was a time in my life, a time when the thought of carrying on just seemed too hard. A time when the pain felt so unbearable, so overwhelming, it was as though there was nothing left inside. Just a bitter feeling of emptiness and a burden I simply didn't have the strength to shoulder. I found myself discarded by a world which had turned its back on me. I had to endure the hatred and vitriol of complete strangers. I was judged and condemned by people who didn't know me, and by those who had never met me or spoken to me. I was attacked, discredited, vilified and abused. I had my entire life ripped apart by those who had no idea who I was or what it was like to walk in my shoes. Not only that, those who I thought would stand by my side no matter what life might throw at me, who I believed wouldn't hesitate to defend me, simply turned their back when I most needed them. I became the subject of their judgment, their scorn, and was ultimately condemned by those who I would have given my life for. And no matter where I sought refuge, I could feel the sense of revulsion, of disdain. I felt abandoned, lost without any direction. And day by day, I was being consumed by bitterness and resentment. It tore through my very soul and left me devoid of any feeling of honor, of pride, of self-worth, to a point where it felt like there was nothing left in this world for me to fight for, and nothing left to inspire me to carry on. What happened to my life? A life of such promise, of such potential. How was it all taken away? This feeling, this sense of injustice led me to the lowest depths a person can possibly sink. My life had no value and no meaning. And whilst on this path of contempt and misery, I took the coward's way out. I chose to close my eyes off to the light, and believe me, it was a choice. Yes, misfortune had played its part in my life, but far greater than that. I'd allowed the challenges that we all inevitably face to overwhelm my thoughts and dictate my actions. Rather than stand firm in the storm, I had become consumed in my own sorrow. I failed in my obligation to do the right thing. I failed to take responsibility for the situation that I had found myself in. And I failed in my duty as a man. I lost the respect of the people around me, of those people who genuinely cared for me. And more importantly, I lost respect for myself. Now, I used to think that there could be no greater feeling of hopelessness, of dejection, than the feeling you get when you realise that you have let yourself down, that you yourself have come up short, that you're merely a faded shadow of the man who you thought you were. But I was wrong. As disconsolate and forlorn that realization was, I came to learn that true loss and suffering can only be understood when you realize that you're not the most important thing in life. When you learn that this world does not revolve around you. For true loss and suffering is not what we ourselves endure, but the loss and suffering we see and feel in those who we care for the most. Those we love. It was a lesson I should have heeded much earlier in life, since I knew deep down that the only thing that kept me alive in those darkest moments was the thought of putting my parents through even more pain. But as it was, the cost of that lesson, the price I ultimately had to pay, was losing my own father. When I learned that the man who had given me every opportunity in life was dying, confronting the realization that I had failed to become the man whom he'd hoped I would be, opened my eyes for the first time to the person whom I'd actually become. And that understanding, as unconscionable as it was amidst the pain and hurt, also led me to a point where I knew I had to make a decision. As I watched his illness take hold, I saw in my father a man who never turned his back on life. A man who fought with every ounce of strength that remained in his weakened body. And who, despite his suffering, despite the pain, had only one care as he breathed his last breath: that his wife, my mother, would be cared for and looked after he'd gone. And in those final moments, as my father passed away, I came to a point in my life where I knew I had to either throw in my hand or make the best of the hand I'd been dealt. I somehow managed to find the strength to pull myself back from the edge, to be honest with myself and face up to my many failures as a man. I have never claimed to be a person whose life has been devoid of sin, but I came to realize through all the pain, all the heartache, that life is never black or white. I came to understand that it is the very suffering in life that gives it meaning. That you can only begin to understand what it is to be alive when the pain and suffering is so raw, so visceral, that it makes everything real. And by God's grace, I learned to stand tall once again, to lift my head up high and take my life back. I found the courage to tell those who care for me and to tell my family that I'm sorry. I found the strength to get up off my knees, to look in the mirror and not be ashamed of who I am. And I found the heart to look up to the sky and tell my father that although I miss him every moment of every day, I am so grateful for the life he bestowed upon me and the final lesson he taught me. And that's to fight to be the man I can be, to strive to be the man who I ought to be, so that one day I might honour the man who he was.